Next speaker is Benny Yang, and Benny graduated from UT Dallas last year, and he has already founded 2 startups. His first startup is Legends.ai, a League of Legends analytics platform built to use big data and machine learning, mentor players on how to improve their games. And he recently sold the company to a major esports company. And his another company, Abacus Protocol, has been through a Y Combinator and recently raised $2 million already by Twitch founder Justin Kang. He will talk about his passion and how about blockchain, AI, ML, and his journey in the startup land.
Hi everyone. So Kevin hit the nail on the head with the standing on the shoulders of the giants comment. That's actually huge with a lot of the tech industry, a lot of the people who are in startups nowadays. David and Goliath style. A lot of the people who are huge in the game have basically taken advantage of the accomplishments and research that a lot of people have done in the past, and that is how we're able to progress so fast. So I'm going to be talking to you guys specifically about the recipe to start a blockchain startup. This is kind of a culmination of my experience, what I've learned through the various mentors and the people who have. Oh, it's fine. Mike's making me a little bit queasy. Oh yeah, no, I'm good. Wait. So, as I was saying, I'm basically just going to talk about the experiences that I've learned running a startup. Okay, so the experience I've learned running a startup, and basically kind of some of the misrepresentations of what it's like to be in a startup, and especially startups in the blockchain space, because the blockchain has been basically clouded by a lot of things that people don't exactly understand because it's a new concept, and recently it's actually a super advanced topic that is actually quite simple. So let's begin. So as mentioned, my name is Benny. Here are the 2 companies that I helped start with a couple of my colleagues. We started it back in college, and the first one, besides everything that was already mentioned, it was funded by Microsoft Azure. They picked us up. We were as part of a incubator in Austin, and they just really liked our product. They liked the direction we were going. They knew that League of Legends was a huge game at the moment and is picking up tons of traction in the esports community. So they were on board. And luckily, because of all the clout we built, we were able to sell it and exit in the fall of 2018. Then after that, we found our next company. This was after basically investing tons of money in blockchain. We kind of got the idea that we knew a little bit about blockchain. We knew about some investors in the area, so we were basically positioned perfectly to get ourselves started with a startup, and so we did. And we've gone through many iterations of what we stand for, but at the moment it's a financial data operations management platform, which, to break it down simply, we build forms for law firms. Raised $2 million, and also, I think it wasn't mentioned that it's been through Y Combinator, and this is probably one of the most rigorous startup accelerators. They teach you tons of things, they give you tons of knowledge specific to startups, and in America they're considered like #1. So, before I continue, I'd just like to mention that it's actually kind of crazy how far a single person and a couple of my peers were able to get simply by just being curious, chugging along and really wanting to know deeper into the subject matter. A few years ago, none of us really knew very much about blockchain. We only invested in it and messed around with it as basically a kind of like stocks gambling type of deal. And none of us really actually knew how to run a startup either. We were just basically bored as heck college students. We were tired of the monotonous daily routine, and we wanted to do something new, and we had a couple ideas. So we got started. And you'll find that in the blockchain space, that this kind of feeling is perpetuated among a lot of people. And the people here in the blockchain space kind of follow this vision. And you'll find that throughout all the companies in blockchain, you ask them what it's about, and their core belief will kind of circle back to the same thing, and they'll all say it in some variation or the other. And it's because they're all curious, it's because they're driven by trying to see the world in a different way, and it has allowed them to basically take their ideas and execute them in a rigorous amount of time, such as, for us, an example, we took only a year. So what is this vision? To get into it into detail, let's just see what the blockchain landscape is today. So at the current point in time, it's kind of like in a standstill gap between the early adoption and then mainstream interest. So basically you see huge companies starting to ready their horses. They've got their feet wet in blockchain. They're ready to do something big, but none of these products are actually completely fleshed out yet. So you have AWS, for example, implementing blockchain solutions. You have Facebook coming up with their currency called Libra, but they're still running into a lot of issues with SEC regulations. You got Hyperledger, which is this huge blockchain collaborative venture by these huge names, but nothing yet. And you'll see that companies around the world are all doing the same thing. And actually China is leading in this, so great for us Chinese people, right? Just about 80% of companies, and this was a study done by PwC, which is an investment firm, 80% of companies are interested in some way. And of those companies, 60% of digital companies, specifically like software companies, already actually have funded and began projects related to blockchain in some way. And it's still growing. Like since 2017, it's up 300%. And it's right now at 3.9 billion in terms of VC funding in 2018. And why am I telling you all these big numbers? Why am I showing you that there's huge interest? Well, it's mainly because right now, blockchain is not a myth. It's not some kind of pyramid scheme where you just get into it, make a quick buck, and then get out. Blockchain is definitely here to stay. When you see a industry that is in this gap between early adoption, where basically there's tons of fanatics that are throwing whatever they can to get something to work, and people just absolutely die-hard crazy about an idea. And then now you see companies actually putting huge amounts of money, huge amount of resources into a area such as this, blockchain, then you know it's here to stay. You know that it's something that is going to become legitimate in the future, and it kind of makes you curious. What is this vision that everyone says? What is this blockchain idea that everyone seems to be so adamant about? And to explain that, let's kind of look into the internet. So let's take ourselves back in time to choked with water. Let's take ourselves back to around the early 2000s. Internet was still getting popular. But before the internet, how you would receive information is traditionally through a lot of bound books. So take for example, if you wanted to receive news, you get a paper boy, you throw it at your doorstep, literally, physically. And also, if you were to get mailman, we still do that today though. Encyclopedia Britannica, for example, was the only way you could actually view archived information. But then the internet came along and basically said, you know what? We now can have instantaneous communication across the network, across vast distances. So now that means that we've essentially decentralized information. And that's key, because when you decentralize information like the internet did, you allow for a whole new world of opportunity. And that is efficiency, that is more reliability, less downtime, because there's multiple nodes. And if you think about it, sites like Wikipedia, for example, if you think about like the recent tragedies, unfortunately, that has happened in the last few weeks, they're already all 100% documented, all to the last footnote on Wikipedia. And Encyclopedia Britannica cannot compete in any way to that. It is 10 times more efficient, probably 100-fold more efficient. And so, why that's important is, if you take that and you magnify it again, you allow yourselves to decentralize, to democratize concepts that were previously impossible to do in today's modern age, and you do it with the resources we already have. So you allow blockchain to do it again on top of the internet. Then you provide a world of opportunity that no one has seen before. Think about like the government. If you were to democratize the government into a machine that can do all that for you, or if you take assets that are previously unbreakable, like houses, cars, and you allow yourselves to democratize these, the world becomes 10 times more efficient and better for everyone. And while this is, a lot of abstract talk, let's break it down into basically 3 tenets that basically define the blockchain vision. These are the 3 tenets that you'll see some variation of, and every founding company in a blockchain organization, they'll tell you something that's related to these 3 things, and they'll say that this is what they stand by, this is where they put their goalposts. And let's talk about each one of them. So, firstly, some blockchain companies are super ecstatic about distribution. And the fact that if you can distribute information and keep it distributed, what essentially that means is, like think about cloud computing, right? You have like a huge network of nodes, and you basically split the work up of a single computer into multiple nodes, and allow yourselves to not only provide a faster operation this way by taking this operation and spreading it out equally, you also allow yourself to have less downtime and also provide yourself a higher opportunity of scalability. As in, if you wanted to take this and do it 100 times faster, you could use the same method and it will grow organically that way, right? And so, blockchain allows us to do that. Secondly, decentralization. And this is where a lot of the anti-government goons come around. They say, you can't trust a corrupt central government. And honestly, it's kind of true, because when a central company goes down, where are you going to go? It's done for. And basically, a lot of our current organizations are backed by the fact that these companies cannot be taken down. They're just too big to fall. But a lot of people in blockchain say, you know what? What if one day they do? What if something happens and these organizations can't maintain the status quo? So that's why it's important to maintain a decentralized network, essentially. And so that means there's no head in any of these organizations. They're all spread out across multiple nodes, and all the computation is done through processes that all work in a network. And then lastly, probably the most known use case for blockchain is its public nature. And this doesn't necessarily mean that there's no privacy. It essentially means that blockchain is now put in a transparent way. So all of the mechanisms behind blockchain or transactions that you make on a chain are completely transparent. You can still have anonymity by like hiding yourself behind a mask, for example, but everything that you do can be verified indisputably this way. And these sound like very abstract concepts, but don't worry, I'll explain kind of a real-world use case of all these 3 things in the next slide. So, these 3 things provide huge advantages in their own ways, and since it's kind of hard to grasp right now, I'll show you how one existing technology that is kind of popularized blockchain technology is using all 3 of these things to basically make its network, and that is Bitcoin. And this diagram looks complicated, I know. But some of you engineering-minded people probably are thinking this is nothing. But this is basically Bitcoin at its roots. So it's actually quite simple if you just look at it from this perspective. So let me explain to you how this works. These are all blocks, these colored blocks. Each one of these blocks basically contains a little tree of transactions. And what these transactions are just, plain text, normal everyday, think about to, from, date, typical things you put in a ledger. A traditional bank would have just taken all these transactions and put it in a huge table, maybe done some sorting or something like that, but essentially they have a ledger just like this. But we put it into a block. But why do we need to put it into a block specifically? The magic about this block is that it allows machines to treat it as if it's a single unit. And when you're able to compress information into like a single unit, you are allowing yourself to take basically a snapshot of it, which is more data efficient. And not only that, but it allows you to basically allow machines to do more of the work that humans originally would do. So take, for example, in a traditional bank, they would actually verify each one of these transactions on their own, or you just trust them because they're a central party, right? Well, here, since everything's inside a block, this allows us to basically take machines and use computational power to vote on the validity of this block. So you basically break it down into a small enough unit that machines can vote on, and they can use any mechanism that they choose to vote on this, which is kind of the beauty of blockchain. They could use either actual human voters, or they can use like computational power. Like whoever has the most computational power voting on a certain block wins. And so by doing this, you essentially democratize the ledger, which was once centralized, into a bank, for example. And so now that you've completely democratized the way that transactions work, you put it as a part of a chain, and now essentially you have this long chain of events where you can actually prove publicly that these transactions happen in a certain order. So it allows you to basically have public proof of the validity of transactions, that they're legitimate, that they're indisputable. You democratize the central organization that is originally supposed to be held responsible for these transactions by creating these blocks. So it's decentralized. And it's distributed because the method that you use to vote on these blocks is a voting mechanism which you can spread across multiple nodes. So it's quite beautiful. It allows you to basically, through this simple three-step mechanism, you're essentially able to completely tear apart a bank, right? So now all of this is done programmatically. Well, not necessarily 100%, but in theory and in concept, that's essentially what blockchain works with. So, and there's a couple of other like nodes in here that are like the nons, like the Coinbase. Those are really just cryptographic pieces of information. This is literally all there is to Bitcoin. This is This is literally this is what Bitcoin stands for. This is the composition of it. And so basically, this kind of thinking challenges us to think of the world in a completely different way. It basically takes us in, if you were to flip the world upside down and basically rip apart all the central organizations and say, you know what, let's decentralize everything and let's try it this other way, Curiosity led all these people to this new method, and they're all trying it out because it has some validity to it. And there's a reason they're still curious about it. It's because there's so many things in here that can be transferred into a democratized way that we still haven't done in the world. And we cannot know if how it will play out unless we actually try it. And that is the main reason that a lot of people end up sticking with blockchain, why they're still trying it out, why people are still putting trials out there. It's because we won't know until we try. So, curiosity, really important. So, speaking of that, the many trials that we've had, there's a lot of reasons why it's not working out so well. So Bitcoin, for example, is way too slow. They're limited by, at the moment, 7 transactions per second globally. And if you imagine all the transactions that happen in the world, that's just not going to cut it. A lot of other solutions that are done by like proof of work or proof of stake or proof of, they're coming up with a bunch of them. But currently, proof of work is the current concept that people are using. And it's just way too slow, and all the other ones are not legitimate enough. There's a couple shout outs of a couple companies that I think are actually making good strides, but I'll talk about that later. And then secondly, right now a lot of the blockchain projects are flawed in this sense. Take for example, they've been susceptible to hacking and abuse because of the entire complete anonymity of the blockchain network, because people are hidden behind blockchain addresses and don't actually use their real identity. It basically allows people to get away with huge scandals like exposing an infinite loop in Ethereum, for example, getting away with 70 million, nowhere to be traced, can't find them. Same with Bitcoin, one of the biggest exchanges, the #1 biggest exchange in Bitcoin, called Mt. Gox, a couple of years ago, lost 450 million because apparently their founders were just a bunch of scammers. And everyone trusted them because, which is ironic because they're a central organization. People in blockchain trusted a central organization too much and ended up losing because of it. So, people are curious, but you gotta be careful, you know what I mean? You can't step on a spike. And additionally, it's just not gotten too much of traction because in general, there's a ton of technophobia. And you're just gonna see this with any new rising industry. The internet, for example, a lot of people were afraid about it. People were saying books were gonna kill you, printing press, right? People are just afraid of new things. That's just the takeaway, the reason a lot of these new things are slow to get adopted. So, now I've kind of explained the kind of the vision and the background of blockchain. Let's kind of look into the history of startups in blockchain. So, ever since I bought and regrettably sold my first Bitcoin, I think around 2010, I had about 10 Bitcoiners worth like $20 back then. I don't even want to think about how much it's worth now. A lot of startups around that time would take advantage of the metadata field in Bitcoin and basically create this spin-off of Bitcoin called color coins. Now if you imagine with Bitcoin being proof of work and being so slow, these weren't very efficient and they eventually died off because there's no actual practical use case for it. Those died around 2014. But then around that time, Bitcoin grew to, in terms of market capitalization, quite a bit. But not only that, they also grew quite a bit in actual interest. And people started to fidget around with more of the architectural. You started getting the scientists, the research people who were getting really into blockchain. And they created numerous altcoins. And basically, these just take the Bitcoin perspective and they take the blockchain ideology and they just change the algorithms a little bit. They change how they do things. Take, for example, the proof of work way of doing things versus proof of stake. And they can make it really successful. This is around the time where me and my colleagues really started to get into blockchain because you start seeing these newfound coins and they'd actually be growing quite a bit of traction. Just to name a few, Dogecoin actually they got enough money to get sponsored by NASCAR, so they painted their little Dogecoin logo on a NASCAR rally car. You can actually look it up, and it was driving through a bunch of racetracks. And another good mention is Ethereum with their smart contracts. EOS is doing great work with their the innovation that they have in terms of their proof of stake strategy, and Zcash doing a bunch of there's a bunch of coins, and I don't think I have enough time to go through all of them, but they're doing some really innovative things, and we invested money into them, and you'd see these companies grow 10x in value because they were just that good compared to Bitcoin. And then people start to get the idea after that you can take this concept and now actually use it to legitimately fund organizations. So then there's this whole new bubble of a term called ICOs to start to show. And for those of you who know what IPOs are, which stands for initial public offering, think for example when like Twitch or any legitimate organization, after like many years of working hard and getting their name out there, they open their company to the public and allow people to invest in their stock. ICOs are basically a spin-off of that, which stands for initial coin offering. And I don't know, just the people of blockchain for some reason like to scam. So they did none of those things. They didn't invest a ton of time or effort. Actually, like there's a study that said around 80% of ICOs in 2018 were scams. It was so bad to the point that I was seeing articles of people publishing bots that could detect whether or not you stole someone else's white paper or website because you're trying to run some kind of scam ICO. And they're making serious money doing this too. The bad ones would make $3 million. The good ones would make some 15 million. The SEC recently shut down one that raised up to 600 million. And they would have gotten away with it if it weren't for the SEC crackdown, which happened around 2018. It's just the reason that a lot of ICOs ended up dying, and the reason that you see only STOs and IEOs now. So, yeah, basically, the government wasn't letting this whole clown fiesta go on for too long, and they just wouldn't allow it. So now let's get into some real startup stuff. Okay, so at this point in time, after investing into a lot of projects, we went to a lot of Bitcoin meetups and blockchain meetups, and we met a couple investors, and we knew enough, and we had the right resources, so we got ourselves started. And along the way, we actually kind of started to realize that a lot of the blockchain companies actually operate very similar, and fortunately for us, very similar to a lot of software companies. And having us having a background in software, we were very familiar with the languages that you'd have to use, the media attention that you'd garner, the way investors would talk to you. They're actually completely different when you talk to different industries like hardware, like infrastructure. Software companies are a different breed of things. So anything that you see beyond this point of the presentation is strictly for software companies, and specifically blockchain companies. Because they just work differently, they work at a different pace. That's just all there is to it. So, before I begin, let me say why, if you have an idea, if you have a startup idea, why you shouldn't run a startup. And while these are great motivations for running a startup, they should not be your sole reason. If you pick any combination of reasons out of this list, and these are your sole reasons, then forget about it, right? Just to briefly go over them, there are a lot more opportunities working at a company or working at a startup to become rich by either getting equity or climbing the ladder. Being your own boss, mostly not true. You're going to be the slave of media, slave of investors. It's going to be quite hectic, really. Well, this is the flip side of the coin. These are all positives. They're all pros and cons, but they're mostly cons. You're going to find that out pretty soon. Flexible work-life balance. While it is true for a small organization, you can get a pretty good work-life balance with fewer than 10 employees, fewer than 10,000 customers. But once you hit that that ladder, it's going to be really bad. You're going to have to be flying out to business meetings. You're going to be constantly working, staying up all night, getting new features in, getting that last push before the next update. Really hectic stuff. It ramps up really hard, really fast, and you won't expect it. Having a huge impact. Like I said, think about all these big companies. Facebook didn't have Messenger. Actually, Messenger was started at a hackathon project by an intern. Actually, not specifically Messenger, but Facebook chat. So basically, the thing that turned into Messenger. Started as an intern, a hackathon project by an intern. And Google Maps, that was also an intern project. A lot of these huge innovations that you see everywhere today, you can have much more impact working as an engineer in a big company. So think about that for a second. Or even just as an employee at a startup. Achieve fame and glamour, this is probably one of the worst things. You're actually going to achieve more infamy because the media is going to be basically working against you. They're looking for the scoop. And unless you're always making breakthroughs and making the next advance, which is most likely not true, you're going to be on the downside. So it's not going to work. And this is it. This one reason right here is the reason why you should have a startup. If you have an idea, and this is a mistake we made. We basically did all this and forgot this, and we ended up pivoting a ton. We paid for it. And it's still alive today. We actually might not survive in the next couple of years because we pivoted too much. We wasted too much resources and time doing things that were not specifically built for a certain product, and people might lose interest. We might lose our momentum. But it's this. This is key right here. You have a product that you're 100% passionate about, and I think this is what drives a lot of people in the blockchain space. It's that strong vision that all these founders in blockchain see. They see the world in a different way. They see that flip side where you democratize everything. And when you're absolutely fanatical about it, that's when you take that project and you make it real. So now I talked about what you need. Let's talk about how you actually go about doing it. And I'm running a bit short on time, so I'm going to go pretty quickly here. Like I said in the beginning, there's no recipe. I said that there was one, but there really isn't. And the reason is because most people who run startups, they don't do it with the cookbook in hand. They don't have years of startup expertise. They don't get a coach to teach them how to run a startup. They're fanatical about a project, and they work on it out of their garage. They do it day and night, and they're absolutely obsessed. And while there's no actual recipe to running a startup, there are patterns that you'll see in successful startups. And not all startups that do well follow these things. A lot of them are outliers. And so this is basically the 3 things that YC, Y Combinator, drilled into us. They basically told us these 3 things were out of our batch, some of the patterns that we saw, and they drilled this into us like day and night. They basically say you follow this pattern, otherwise you're going to get kicked out. So firstly, idea. Okay, so a bad idea is bad. That means you cannot improve it with better team, better execution. A bad idea is going to fail. It's going to flop. You have to pivot. There's a 2-sentence rule for every startup idea. So this is actually pretty crucial. You're going to hear this everywhere in Silicon Valley. They're going to say, if you can't say your pitch in 2 sentences or less, it's too complicated, it's not good enough. So forget about it. Or narrow it down, laser focus. Good ideas don't always look good. And this is actually one of the more critical things. You should not be brainstorming ideas. Ideas come from kind of an innate nature, a problem in a specific industry that people don't see from the outright. Like things that sound really good at first typically are very bad. Like, a lot of people say, oh yeah, we're just an Uber for X, or we're like an Airbnb for this. Well, some of those companies actually do end up doing well. Most of them end up failing because they don't have specific market research. They haven't actually become fanatical about the product. They haven't driven themselves to the edge of understanding what that product really means. And so, it's really the unpopular ideas, the infrastructure changes, let's fix this leaky pipe in the toilet, These are the problems that people actually have problems with, and they actually really get substance from. And so now that we're done with the idea, let's move on to product. When it comes to your product, specifically software products, timing is pretty key. Unfortunately, this is not something you can always control. While you can't control the market you join, the saturation and what time you join the market, sometimes it's just unfortunate, but unfortunately it does impact your launch, it impacts your growth. So it's something you should always keep in mind. And here it is again, passionate about the product. You should, basically there's this indicator I like to go by. If you find yourself not being able to sleep some nights, this is kind of that point where it's you're just thinking about the product all night, all day. You're just like, I gotta go back home and I gotta fix this and I gotta work on this project, and that's kind of the sign that you've kind of found that product match. And before, you won't necessarily have this in the beginning. Sometimes when you work on a project, at first it'll sound like a chore. Sometimes you'll feel that. But eventually, you hit this stride and you have this feeling. And once you hit that feeling, I say, turn that into a startup. Try it out. And here's a great quote by Paul Graham. This guy comes up with a lot of great resources for startups and just things related to Silicon Valley and math-related things. Do things that don't scale. And for a lot of startups, this is actually huge because a lot of companies think that they need to scale up in magnitudes to impress their investors, to make sure that there's no downtime, to be absolutely perfect. But most of the time, what you need to do is actually just apply that Band-Aid fix and just get things working so that you can move on to the next problem. Because that's just the most efficient way to use your time. So keep it simple. And then lastly, this is probably the most important deal, execution. And this is some of the things that we as a part of our company actually struggled with the most. It's like we put our health in the back burner. Most of the time we just have one Soylent a day, and then other than that we have one meal, spend all day coding, and we suffered because of it, because we didn't set good habits. We didn't make the right choices in the beginning so that our product can improve from it. Everything that you do, all the things that you set the pace of at the very beginning is going to show through your product. So, if you're sleep deprived, the product's going to suffer. If, you're not thinking straight, you're having second thoughts, people are going to see it. Investors are going to see it. So, focus on your mental psychology. Ben Horowitz, founder of Andreessen Horowitz, which is a huge investment firm besides YC, this is a pretty good quote. Number one role of the CEO is to manage your own psychology, and I'd say this is true for anyone in a startup, whether you're the first employee, whether you're the CTO, just when you're working at something that's high-paced, or just anything that requires a lot of stress in your environment, your mind is number one. So keep that in mind. And also, there's a statistic that says that co-founders, provide a lot of success, and it's just kind of generally true because when you have another partner that's in it with you together, it just helps a lot mentally. And Lines Not Dots is kind of like a business jargon thing that a lot of people say. It basically means that it's kind of going back to the don't scale too greatly, and it basically means that investors will want to see progress, like a line on the timeline of your events, as opposed to dot, where you just throw everything once in this one huge release and then not do anything again. So when you're working on a product, you should always be continuously improving on it in small increments, as opposed to dumping everything into a huge release. And here's another thing, just about all startups should not be, or software startups should not be worrying about hiring. You should be sticking with your team and working on it to the very end until you absolutely need to get that first employee. And that's specifically related to keeping up momentum, because when you have employee, onboarding is just a chore. You have to worry about their mental psychology, and it's just why would you burden yourself with probably one of the more complex things about a startup, a human being, right? So don't worry about hiring, keep up momentum, manage your mental psychology. And so basically the takeaway of just everything that I've said, blockchain's new, you should act fast. There's a huge vision that's going on in blockchain, and if that sounds interesting to you, I would say take a look into it. Try to see some of the problems there, and if you have a startup that or startup idea that you want to execute, mess around with it and see if it might do you some good. And startup, nothing without a product. You need a product. A product is 100% what a startup is. So forget everything else unless it's that product. And just kind of general life tips: stay healthy. Be curious. There's this one good quote. It's like if your mind is in control of your body and there's nothing in control of your mind, you're basically a lost person. And with that, that's basically the end of my presentation. Here's a couple takeaway books and resources that I'd say are really good for just startups and blockchain in general. These two white papers are literally college dissertation level. They're 10 pages long. They give you a really good rundown of the entire blockchain landscape. After reading these two books, these two white papers, which are basically PDFs, they're available online in GitHub. I got 90% of my understanding of blockchain today. So there's that. Paul Graham makes really good recipes to just about anything, and those two books really good. So that's it. Thanks for the time.
Thanks a lot, Benny. A great presentation. I'm a serial entrepreneur myself and a founder of a failed startup company for software. I can see that his comments and his advices on startup are very, very good. Those are, for me, a field tested with sweat and blood. So good stuff, good stuff. So we are short on time. We plan to end this event at 8:30. Now we are past. So we will go ahead and forego the commentaries and directly open the floor for Q&A for Benny. So anybody want to ask questions? Okay.
Okay, thank you for talking, Benny. I had a good question. So how did you identify this niche in the law firm building form? So would identifying this niche be part of an internship you did, or you saw it in the market, a friend saw it? Like, how did you identify this space?
Okay, so to speak specifically, I guess the kind of the different iterations we went through is we originally started off as an exchange. So we were going to be a crypto exchange, just like a lot of the IEOs. IEO stands for initial exchange offering. And basically, we were going to create a token. We're going to facilitate our own exchange, specifically with a lot of traders, right? Because that's where we grew up. We were doing a lot of investment. Then it turned out the SEC was cracking down on ICOs and IEOs just at that moment in time. And so we're like, dang, regulations need a lot of work in the blockchain landscape. And so we started to look into these regulations, these mounds and mounds of PDF papers of like what the SEC is trying to classify as security. And then that basically brought us to the point where we're just like, you know what, let's completely change our idea. We're going to become a protocol we're going to become a lower level of the exchange essentially. And that's a protocol to facilitate trade. And here we basically take these, the assets of like a cryptocurrency and then basically automatically turn this into an SEC compliant security. And at that point, we're just like, we're working really hard. And then actually, Twitch co-founder, sorry, I'm blanking out, ridiculous. He basically came up to us. He founded another company called Atrium, and that's a law firm. And he was like, you know what, we really like the work you're doing. We'd like to partner with you guys, and if you guys can help us build our forms, and you can still build your own protocol, we just want you to specifically work with our forms and help us out. We'll put a ton of money down into your platform, and we'll give you tons of like startups that are also working with us, and we'll let you have them as your direct clients. So that was just like a huge deal for us, and we're just like, okay, we'll help you guys and slowly pivot to this law firm thing. And basically, we're basically satiating the needs of our customers. We're finding a product that a lot of customers need, and we found that the use case for our previous two platforms weren't necessarily impossible, but they're just that there's not enough of a market for it. And Atrium, with the Twitch co-founder, basically provided that directly to us, and so that's why we went that direction.
Benny, thank you very much. Great talk again. I have a lot of friends in the blockchain area. Some of them are in China, some of them are in the United States, like including Cybermiles. Cybercheck.
Oh, yeah. Cybermiles. I've heard about that. It's great.
So we kind of think that it's in the winter right now for blockchain, right? Last year, like so many, it's like a wave. Many investments. Yeah. So I know you're very passionate and. What do you think about that? Is that something? Is it time for you to adjust your direction, or you think that's going to be booming in the future?
So that's the thing. So right now it's at a trough, and that's what makes it actually even better of an opportunity for you to get yourself started. Because whenever the activities start to slow down, the organizations around, like people in Silicon Valley, become a little bit more desperate for breakthrough ideas, and they start to be more interested in new outfit companies, and basically whenever that next boom comes, you're basically positioning yourself right in the right amount of time so that the market is ready for your idea to actually skyrocket, because you basically follow this market as it grows up. As more news and media starts to circulate about blockchain, you already have your product fleshed out. You've already got yourself in a position that you can start talking to investors and getting media attention. So that's why it's important to start earlier as opposed to, whenever something's already at the, peak. So that's why I think right now it's a winter, state for cryptocurrency. It's actually advantageous.
Okay. I have a similar question. What does STO stand for?
Security token offering.
Okay. Another question. There's so many coins there, right?
Oh, yeah.
Tons of them.
Tons of them.
So how many do you think that they will survive?
So one of the most promising one I'd say right now is one called Hashgraph and another one called EOS. And basically, the common theme between these two is that they're architectural coins. So a lot of other coins, not to put any shame on them or saying that they're not going to succeed, they're all, surface level. They're all applications or web applications, stuff like that. But when you move on to deeper level things like protocol level and algorithmic things like Hashgraph, which is completely changing the way that blockchains work, then if it actually turns out well, which it seems like it's doing, it's going to have breakthroughs. Basically, they're going to be the layer that other people work on top of, and the more people you have working on top of your product, that just it's exponential, right? Simple math, right? It's just going to exponentially grow as more people get interested. So that's why those are going to be so well.
You use the internet as kind of analogy here, right?
Yeah.
The coin will be eventually at 1 or 2 dominant in the world, or is it going to be, say, 10 or dozen coins going to survive for the application?
Right. So this is actually something I personally am not too sure about.
Okay.
I'd say that the current landscape of cryptocurrency is just way too uncertain to make any kind of validation there. I know what will survive in the immediate future, which is like 5 to 10 years. But one thing's for sure, Bitcoin's not going to be there. I can guarantee that unless they completely do some weird hard fork, it's just not going to be there because it's just way too inefficient. It's it's a bygone era, and they established a lot in I guess the time of the limelight is gone. But yeah, there's no saying what currencies are going to end on top. Eventually, maybe blockchain might transition away from coins and start moving on to different applications, like being part of a network, being part of big companies, and being like private blockchains, for example. People might what actually hits stride might actually what actually hits mainstream adoption might actually be things that people can use besides currencies. So who knows?
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing. This was a great
So you mentioned, you're doing forms on those forms on the blockchain.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. What specific advantage do you get?
So the advantage of having everything put onto a chain is you essentially now have proof of provenance of these forms. So traditionally, whenever you have these forms built through just typical machine learning, I don't even know if it's that complex. Probably just just reading the forms and just scanning them into digital copies. There's no validation behind who signed it, right? There's no validation behind its history, right? You can't necessarily relate these forms unless you have a central organization tell you these forms are given to this guy. So that's just not going to work unless you have something like a blockchain step in and basically say, this specific form is signed by this address, and these addresses are linked to all these other addresses. And so, since everyone agrees on this decentralized concept, you allow yourself to basically create a protocol where any company can step in and look at this protocol and say, just like how the internet works, step in and say that this is legitimate, this is a form that I agree on because we all trust this protocol to work. And essentially, when you trust things at a protocol level like this, you allow yourself to become 10 times more efficient than trusting a central sort of organization, specifically because central organizations love to compete. They love to create new things that are arbitrary, and while competition is good for a network, this is just a completely different way of thinking about doing things, decentralizing it. So that's the main advantage.
Yeah, thanks.
Because of the time, we're trying to finish before 9. Last 2 questions, okay?
Yeah, I'm sorry, second time asking questions. So can you give some examples of what is the biggest and very successful applications for the blockchain right now?
So, in terms of, actually, unfortunately, I have to tell you that a lot of the applications on blockchain are not very successful. They are all proof of concepts, kind of like, I guess this is kind of like a bad analogy, kind of like, you know, how nowadays, like, self-driving cars are becoming really popular. It's just a really complex problem that has to do with a different set of issues like game theory, as opposed to, you know, actual computational complexity. And so, most of the projects are at the moment, they're proof of concepts. And I guess the one that, you know, obviously has achieved the most, you know, traction is Bitcoin, since everyone's heard about it, and actually a lot of people have implemented it into their systems. But besides that, you know, Bitcoin's extremely slow. I would say it's basically unsuccessful. The whole like vision behind blockchain is that it's a promise for like a better future. It's not there yet, but it's a promise waiting to happen, and people are just waiting for that, you know, breakthrough, that scientific breakthrough that is going to completely change everything, and it's going to actually do what it said it's supposed to do. So, yeah. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. Yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
Basically, I would like to ask that question on behalf of all the students right here. Because our questions are asked for by those who obviously know a lot already. For the student, I think most of them should be as confused as I am right now, what this blockchain is. But to benefit, I think if you can explain when you are in university environment, what happened? What have you seen, and what are the trigger events so that your path from a university, you just suddenly jump out of a traditional path, going to, you know, graduate and then go to maybe grad school or find a job or somewhere. You just completely just jump out of your people expected more familiar path, right? Just what happened there. And if you can explain that, maybe they will benefit those students there, right? And to see in their everyday life, do they see the trigger event as well, or they just completely ignore this?
So, this is what I like to think of it as. That's a great question, by the way. And for all of you students that I see, and I actually already know a couple of you are startup-minded, that you're interested in possibly doing this. Basically, it's a numbers game. It's a probability game. And so, when like my personal story, there's not a single trigger event. There is not some huge jump that got me from university student to startup major, right? There is essentially a lot of small events, a lot of small changes that I let my curiosity entice me to follow, right? Like, there's this club that, you know, all these people who are startup-minded are interested in. I joined that. There's this dude who just talks about ideas all day. I talk to that dude. Or maybe he talks to me. Maybe the opportunity comes on my doorstep. And that's another thing about startups in particular. You're just going to find, actually, this is kind of the thing that you're going to see, actually, in the grander scale of life. That there's going to be opportunities that pass you every single day. And whether you realize that these opportunities are there and take advantage of them is completely up to you. So it's these small changes where every day you look at the opportunities you have available, you grab it so you can take the next step up the staircase. So it's really that simple. You just need to basically change your mindset to think of life as a series of small opportunities that you could grasp and, you know, move step at a time, slowly. And they won't be significant, they won't be major, you know. It won't be glamorous, and it won't be, at most time, it won't be fun, you know. It'll actually be quite painful for the most part. But, you know, when you get through it, when you move through these small steps, you will eventually find yourself in better position than you were the day before, and that's where the competition is, right? You're comparing yourself with your past. So, keep that in mind. That's actually just something you should just think about, especially, going through college, going through high school, going through any kind of, environment where there's like social competition. You're in a competition with yourself, and the small changes you make every single day, opportunities you take advantage of, are going to shape your future years from now. So, yeah, that's the end of that lecture.
Okay, welcome back, last question.
Okay, my last, okay, all right. So, yes, it's kind of like the previous question, but can you share with us your story? It's like what kind of friends you met and you team up, you got an idea, and which incubator you approach, and probably you failed first, but you succeeded the second time or whatever. So can you share us with the journey, let's say?
Okay, so that would be a story that's like way too long to explain. I don't think I could get, I don't know if I can get very much in there, but I guess I can talk about, since we ran the startup, kind of like a snapshot timeline of from the beginning to where we are today. So here's step one. We were in Austin. We were working on Legends.ai. It was a project that was still ongoing. We were all working in our dorms. Then all of a sudden, on the internet, we see a bunch of tweets going like, check out EOS, check out Ethereum, check out the price, and we get super invested. These new currencies, quick money, right? Quick buck. And then we're like, they're more than that. They're mathematically and cryptographically, interesting. They're part of some kind of revolution. And we've all heard about Bitcoin at this point in time, and we're just like, okay, let's jump on this train. So we do that. We get more into it, and then we actually met a couple people in the local area at certain blockchain meetups because we wanted to find more people who were like-minded like us. Because specifically, we asked for a Legends.ai project. We wanted to find, just like investors and people in the tech space in general. And we actually ended up stumbling across a lot of crypto people, and that's when we met a lot of our friends, our mentors, specifically one guy who has helped us a ton, David A. Johnson, huge help. He basically took a huge chance on us and was like, I'm going to be your first investor. You don't pay me anything, for now at least, because that's not how investors work otherwise. But don't pay me anything, and you know what? I'll give you guys $200K. And that was the first huge leap. And then so obviously it would be easy to not take that up. So we did it. A lot of trials, a lot of iterating, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of frustration actually. Ton of I'm going to go into that. A lot of psychological warfare there. Beyond that, next breakthrough was when we applied to Y Combinator. This was part of a bunch of applications we did out because David A. Johnson recommended it. He was like, you should get some kind of incubator. They'll give you tons more money. They'll give you tons more resources. So we did that. We also applied like Andrew Horowitz. We applied to a lot of like Chinese companies. We applied to a bunch of people. And Y Combinator actually accepted us. They actually initially rejected us. And after hearing about the fact that we were blockchain related, talk about the right time to join the market, right? They heard we were blockchain related, and they were specifically looking for around that summer with a lot of blockchain projects. And so they got us in at just the right time. And this is just an example of like the opportunities that you see every single day that you sometimes will pass, Like, if you don't take advantage of them, you're just not going to see the true color of them, right? So we took advantage of that. And then that was the next huge breakthrough. We basically went through, basically packed up our bags and actually moved to SF. Worked there for the entire summer. Got a lot of great connections there. That's where we met Justin Kahn, who was working on Atrium at the moment in time, and that's when we pivoted our project again. And so that's all the good stuff, I'm telling you about all of our breakthroughs, and I kind of feel guilty about doing that because that's not a startup, and I don't want to go through all the downfalls to kind of like, I don't want to like dishearten you guys because everything's going to be tough. To be honest, if there's real money in something, it's going to be hard. So, like you're going to cry. I can guarantee you that. So just, if you're really passionate about it, really consider it. It's a ton of fun. It's a ton of experience. It really like, it toughens you. It's really good stuff, you know, like to do this when you're young, or, you know, at any age, honestly, just to have this experience in your life, very valuable. And I guess another takeaway, since you mentioned some of the experiences I've had, there's this really good quote that I always stand by, and that is, your top 5 friends are going to influence your ideologies, what you stand for, and everything that you do at any point in time. So keep in mind, the people that you talk to the most, you're going to realize that you're going to start to absorb some of their mannerisms, you're going to absorb some of their knowledge. You want them to be better than you. So surround yourself with people like that, and that's actually one of like the huge, what is it called, like boosted tips I can give you guys. You know what I mean? Like so that's a quick trick to improve your life. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
All right, the last question.
That must be a good one.
Okay. Benny, I have a question. When I know you have set up 2 companies and you sell the first one soon after you set up company 2 years. And my question is, when you sell the company, what do you, most the factors you consider about? Usually when people start a company, they always think, oh my God, that's my own son. I better to take care of it better and see it grow up. But you just decided to sell it. And after, I want to see the procedure. And second, I want to know, when you sell that company, usually people say, oh, I finished my dream. I better start up to something else. Why you start up again? And how can you find your partner? Thank you.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, your question is 2 parts. The first question is, why did I sell my baby? Second was, how do you find partners? How do you find co-founders, right? Is that correct? Okay, so the first question is, well, it actually kind of came out of the need. I said that startup life is very stressful. I said that there's a lot of trials that you have to go through. And to be honest, we just were not capable enough with the team that we had to continue with the project. And with the many friends that we met, we knew that they're like 10 times more capable, they had 10 times more resources, and it was honestly the best thing to do for it at the time. And the main reason for this is because we were actually juggling 2 startups at the same time, which is not something that a lot of people do. It's actually probably the worst idea you could have. But one was growing so much traction, we just had to unfortunately put the other one aside. And by doing that, we did it a huge disservice, and we just could not keep doing that. So we ended up selling it, and we're good friends with the people who we sold it to, and if we ever get the opportunity again, we'd love to jump back on that project because it's something that we were extremely passionate about, but just something we had to do because it's tough, it's really hard, we knew we weren't capable of it, and that's probably one of the more important things when running a startup is to realize your limits. You cannot push yourself too hard. So that's what we did at that point. And co-founders is a really tough thing, but YC makes it very simple. They basically say, pick your friends. Basically pick the people you've known for years, know their mannerisms, know what's annoying about them, the annoying things that they do to you, know about how smart they are, know what they're passionate about, you can't, if you find someone off the street that seems very intelligent, no matter how good they are, they could potentially completely ruin your project. They can completely betray you because you just don't know enough of their face to understand them. So a good co-founder is always a close friend, always someone you've known for many years. And here's a good analogy, actually. This is one thing that a lot of people in Silicon Valley say. It's, what is it? When you join a company, it's like you go on a date. And it's a lot of fun, right? You get tons of money, or sorry, you don't get that in a date, but you get you get a lot of good things out of it, right? And you can just kind of quit out of it anytime you want. But when you do a startup, that's a marriage. You basically have a kid. You have to maintain it. You have to, you have to treat it with the utmost respect. And that means that, your partner can't be someone who is unloyal or someone who is not good enough to, properly take care of the person. And that's when it gets really tough, right? Because you're going to have to let that person go if they're not capable of doing their job. So, you got to be ready to marry the dude. That's all there is to it.
Nice event on the marriage analogy. We all have experience here. Thanks all of you for coming, and also great thanks to our speaker Kevin and Bonnie, and our two commentators, Dr. Xia and Dr. Lee. So now we all come to take a group picture. And please come and thank you all for coming.